Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special edition of Unique Peace. Today, I am being joined by Sven Erlandson. He is a spiritual counselor and he has quite the interesting background. He's written 6 books. He has a military background, a pastoral background, and a coaching background. So I would like to have everyone welcome Sven. Hi, Sven.
Guys. Hi, it's great to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. I greatly appreciate it.
Pleasure's mine.
So, with that introduction, we were chatting a little bit prior to coming on. With that introduction, you've got a background like no other. I mean that's quite the background. You have a pastoral background, the military background. Counseling. So, how does that all kind of come into your story? What's your story?
Well, I think, just the real short version is, I grew up, my father was a Lutheran pastor. 4 of my uncles were Lutheran pastors, one a missionary in Ecuador for 25 years, whatever. And my mother, they were all World War II generation. And so they were religious, but it wasn't the bad kind of religion. They were the most humble, gracious people. They loved people. And this is their picture right up here. And they served people and just never, I was never criticized my entire life. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. And so anyway, I was the last. My oldest brother had enlisted during Vietnam. And so by the time I came around in the 80s, I had gotten accepted to West Point, the Air Force Academy. And I decided to go to the academy and be a fighter pilot. And got a couple years in and decided, I don't want to do this. I don't know what I want to do next, but I think I want to go into ministry, which was crazy because Dad would go on to say many times, maybe you should go into sales. Maybe you should do this. Maybe you should do that. I think of all of his kids, he thought I was probably the least suited for it, but I loved it. And I was in it for, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years, whatever it was. And I also had a counseling practice at the time, soul counseling, which is different from, psychological counseling. And I go very, very deep with my clients. And I started writing. And my mother had started me journaling when I was about 13. And I never aspired to be a writer ever. I was just journaling, flushing out feelings, and she taught me how to do that. And very instrumental, just like she taught me, how to use a sewing machine. And they both taught us how to garden, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all sort of wove together. In my late 30s, early 40s, I gave up all my life possessions, and I went and lived among the homeless and ministered to them and lived among them, slept every night on concrete for 2.5 years of Oakland, California, Berkeley, California. I had gone to my seminary years. Half of my seminary years were in Berkeley. So I've got a pretty strong slice of hippie in me, truly. And so, yeah, I just worked among the homeless because that's what I felt called to do as one of them. And then I've had a counseling practice in Manhattan, New York City, and also in Connecticut, 2 offices off and on for, all of the last 10 years. I moved out of Manhattan during COVID for obvious reasons. And yeah, that's what I do, write books. And I, on social media doing everything I can. I think I've made about, I don't know, my assistant told me we're up to about 850 videos, 1 minute, 3 minutes, 6 minute, but most of them 1 minute, little quickies, trying to give away as much of my sort of things I've picked up over the years to try to help people heal themselves. And then we have a podcast. 3 of us make it. I'm the host of the podcast, and that's free as well. Just trying to help people. We counsel people on the show. I counsel people on the show and take questions that people might be struggling with in their own healing journey and therapy and so forth. And that's free. Again, trying to put it out there. And then I put about 80% of my counseling method into one of my books. There's a hole in my love cup, so that people could heal themselves, because there's such a shortage of therapists. There's such a shortage of affordable therapy, especially in places like Canada. And so I've sort of done what I could to put out as much of what I know as possible. And so, yeah, that's kind of the short version of my story.
Beautiful. I want to acknowledge Helen out there. She says hi.
Hi,
Helen. That's a really amazing story, because it's very funny that your dad, who's pastor, is like not saying, yes, come into the fold. He's more like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Well, it is. And he had 5 sons and 1 daughter. And but also at the end of his career in ministry, his career in the parish, He had gotten kicked out by a senior pastor with a big ego. My dad is salt of the earth and so forth. And he just wasn't part of the vision of growing this church. And so then my dad ended his career with about 15 years as a chaplain at the Veterans Hospital. And so my dad was, he was just a man of the people. He'd grown up on a farm during World War II, as my mom had. And so just regular folks. And so maybe he said it because he didn't want me to get burned or as well, or who knows. But then in the end, the funny thing is, he was still doing different aspects, slowing down quite a bit by his 80s, all through his 80s. And then he stopped in his early 90s. But he did say at one point when he reached his late 70s, early 80s, he flat out came right out and he was doing a wedding of maybe a family member or something. He said, "Sven, would you help me do the sermon? You're a better preacher than I am." And that was a very, very big gift that he gave me. And my father was always just the kindest man. He never said a critical word. But for him to come out and say that was really nice. And so he sort of came full circle. And after some of his old seminary buddies from the 50s, around the country had a few times he had been approached by a couple of them and they said, "Oh, hey, I read your son's book," whichever book that one was, Spiritual But Not Religious, I think the first one. And they're like, "Wow, that was really great." And so my dad began to sort of see me differently. It's like when my kids were off at college and I would maybe go down there for a weekend down to Baton Rouge. My kids went to LSU. And I go down there for a weekend or whatever. And, we have beers together and we shoot the shit and, play beer pong or whatever. And at the end of the weekend or whatever, they're like, after I left, they're like, "Oh, your old man's cool. I like your old man." Changes his son's perspective when his friends see, so I guess it worked on my dad as well. And so anyway, no, I had great parents.
That's awesome. Because ministry is difficult, especially when you have egos involved.
Oh, yeah.
Taking your ego, we all have one, taking your ego out of ministry is hard.
Yeah.
And I've seen it with several pastors. I actually left a church because of the pastor.
Right.
I won't stay at a church I'm not comfortable with. The pastor. And my son is very much the same way. When we got a new pastor at the church we're currently at, I was like gauging him and he goes, "He's okay, but the jury's out." It's like, okay. Okay. Right. So getting the egos out is important, and just in individuals. So imagine having that level of
and and that was part of what I went through in my own spiritual journey was I had a big ego when I was 17, 19. I'm going to the Air Force Academy, going to be a fighter pilot and all this stuff. And then I left and I got accepted to a Ivy League school and all this stuff. And I had a big ego, really, especially in my 20s. And I was married at the age of 23 and my son was born that year, 9 months later, not 8 months later, 9 months, just for the record. And I had a big ego and life had to grind me down. And I actually got thrown out of ministry as a Lutheran pastor, 3 times. And part of it was because of my stance on gay rights. And this is back in the 90s. Long before the Lutheran Church accepted gays as clergy. I'm not gay, but that was sort of one of my pet issues, having gone to seminary in Berkeley. And I had a lot of friends. And so partly for that, partly for my first book, I was the first author to ever write on the spiritual but not religious movement. You can go to Wikipedia, look up spiritual but not religious. My name is there. And some have credited me with coining the term, whatever. But so that was controversial. My stance on gays was controversial, plus my generally annoying personality. But what life did, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, because everyone's different, is it closed doors that I wanted to go through, and it kept closing doors. And this is why I wrote about it in my last book, or 2 books ago, and there was a hole in my love cup. Closed doors are always greater blessings than open doors. I absolutely believe that. Because that's the universe or God or whatever your language is talking and saying, it's not this. It's not this. And we so think, we got to bust down those doors. You got to overcome obstacles. And I've aged out of that. I'm 56 now. And life has taught me that when I pursue what my vision is, what I feel called to in life, but I do it with an open hand, rather than a closed hand, and it's got to be this, and I got to go, and it's going to be this, and I'm going to make it this. When I go with an open hand, I still pursue it with all my vim and all my vigor, but I am open to new things coming in. I'm open to this thing passing on into something new. My mother always used to say, and she passed away at the age of 93 a couple years ago, and Dad at the age of 92 a year before that. Mom always used to say, you know, sometimes, Sven, we have to go through this door. We have to pass through this door, not because we're meant to be permanently in this room, but because after a certain amount of time in this room, you're going to notice that there's a smaller door way on the other side of the room. And you're going to go through that, and it leads down a stairway into an ante room where you're going to spend some time. Then you're going to notice there's a dumbwaiter that goes up, and you're going to get on that dumbwaiter, and it's going to go up to the roof. And then you're going to notice this other room, this shanty on the roof, where you want to spend the next 14 years. The point is, you would have never discovered that other thing that's even way better suited than any of the previous rooms, unless you had had the courage to go through that first door. But so often when we go through a door, we think, I have to commit to this one room and this is the only way it is. We live with a closed hand rather than to live with an open hand. And that's sort of spiritual mastery, to pursue what I feel called to pursue, yet open to the movements of the gods, of the universe, of God, to be open to those movements. And what I've sort of discovered as I've aged in my own life, but particularly also in the lives of my clients, is that the more we are open to those movements, that things invariably turn out infinitely better than the limited vision that we had for our own lives. We think, oh, this is the biggest I can dream, or this would really make me happy. And, you know, God laughs, and it's like, oh, hold on, sugar tits, here we go. And leads us in amazing new things. But the hard part is letting go of that which I've been holding on so tightly and trusting. There's a great quote by Jerry and Esther Hicks, who write the whole Abraham series. And Esther Hicks, Abraham, whatever, writes, nothing you want is upstream. Everything you want is downstream. Lift your oars. Lift your oars. And I come back to that. That is one of my personal mantras. Just lift your oars, Sven. Just trust the process. Don't hold on too tightly. I still go pursue that which I feel called to pursue, but I always strive to live with an open hand. So.
Sorry, my computer was doing things, but I heard everything you said, and I hope my audience did as well.
Okay.
And I just want to take a moment to put out that other quote that we know also well, and that is, God laughs when God makes plans. Or when
we make plans, God laughs.
God laughs, yes.
Yeah. That's a great one.
So, I don't know what's going on with my camera, but I can still see it.
It's okay. I hear you just fine, so don't worry about the camera. It doesn't bother me.
Perfect. Thank you. So, another thing is, in all of that and everything you've been through, how do you define peace? How has all that helped you with defining peace?
The thing that's helped me in defining peace, okay, you said defining peace, you didn't say achieving peace. So we'll take those as two separate things, but I'll answer your question first. Defining peace is a mind at rest, skin and a stomach at rest. And that means that I have done everything in my power to flush out over the years, or however long it might take, depending on what methods used, to flush out all of the pain, the fears, and especially the bullshit beliefs that you were taught about yourself, to flush out the pain, the fears, and the bullshit beliefs you were taught about yourself from way back there, that have been keeping that motor running inside, that have been keeping your brain stuck like a clothes dryer that won't turn off, just tumbling and tumbling and tumbling. And peace, when we remove not just the pain, but especially the crap that we were taught to believe about ourselves, our unlovability, or that we don't matter, the more we get that out, the more the mind settles. But here's the thing. Here's the real glitch. And this is particularly true of folks who consider themselves spiritual folks, such as myself, that it's very easy to put on a kumbaya, namaste bullshit face and say, I have peace inside. And the more namaste, kumbaya, whatever somebody is, the less I believe it. It's almost like they're trying to convince everyone and thereby convince themselves. And that if you haven't done the dirty, ugly work, if you haven't done the dirty, ugly work of going inside and bringing it back up and allowing it to leave, it's still in you, no matter what smiley face you put on it. And that's scary work, and it's ugly work, and it's hard. It doesn't have to take forever. But, as the great mystic poet Rumi said, the cure for the pain is the pain. It's not putting on a sunny fucking face. It's just that simple thing. The cure for the pain is the pain. And that's the grand terror. People are terrified that if I go into it, it would overwhelm me. It would kill me. And so they pretend that it's not there. Oh, it's definitely there. And again, it's not just the pain, and it's not just the fears. It's especially the stuff that we were taught about ourselves. When the men and women and non-binaries come out and lay a new sidewalk out in front of my office or out in front of my home, they're out there smoothing the cement and putting all the cracks in it, and so forth. And then after they've done their job, what do? They put stakes around it and they put tape around it so that all the little peckerhead kids in the neighborhood don't come running on it and walk through the wet cement. Right. But what happens when the workers go home? All the little peckerhead kids in the neighborhood come out and they press their hand in it, and they get a stick and they write, "Tommy is a fink," and they do things that little peckerhead kids do. Right. Well, what happens to those handprints? What happens to Tommy is a fink? It hardens.
Yeah.
Children are like wet cement. When we are children, our soul is like wet cement. And whatever messages a child receives, and it's not always explicit, very often it's implicit. It's the message behind the message that children are picking up on. Those messages get imprinted and they harden. And those become the core beliefs. Those become the virus infecting the operating system that is the child. And people aren't even aware of the messages they received as children. But consider this. I had a client last night and working together. And this woman grew up with a single mother who was a successful businesswoman. Okay. And it was the children were herself and two brothers, and she was the oldest. And she said, when I was growing up, Sven, my mom was always working. We had a nanny. Mom would say, give us a kiss and a hug and a bowl of Fruit Loops in the morning. And then she'd be out the door and we wouldn't see her until 9:00 at night. Okay. And she said, I respected my mom so much, and she's a powerful businesswoman, et cetera, et cetera. She said, but here's what happened. And I began to dig down. And what we discovered was what happened when this woman, we'll just call her Susie, was growing up and her mother was working a lot and there was no father. Susie, when she was very young, she recalls looking up to her mother, and her mother was her idol, and so on and so forth. And then what happened was, as mom was spending more and more time at work and not home with her, the message inside of Susie, now we're talking 6, 7 years old, so we're not talking very old. The message inside of Susie, as I dug down deeper inside of Susie, and we played with this idea, played with that idea, what we discovered was that the message inside of Susie changed from work is important to work is important, I'm less important. And then it wasn't long before I'm less important changed to, and it's quite logical that this would happen. Who doesn't think that, if my wife, let's say, or my best friend doesn't want to spend time with me, of course I'm thinking I'm less important. Clearly I'm less important. So the child's mind is very logical. And it says, first it's work's important, then it's work's important, I'm less important, and then less important, I'm less important, just makes that little jump to I'm not important. And then it makes that jump to I don't matter and I'm no good. That must be why I'm not important. So now we see a belief system developing in a child, completely unintentional on the part of the parent. But intentions and effects are two different things. So now the message being imprinted into that sweet, wonderful, rambunctious, loving, creative little girl at 7, 8 years old is, I don't matter and I'm not good enough, or I'm no good. And when they get pressed in, that then becomes the virus in the operating system. So you don't think that belief is going to impact how she goes about school, how she goes about having her first girlfriend or her first boyfriend at 14. You don't think it's going to impact that? You don't think it's going to impact who she chooses to hang around with? And generally, one of two things happens, doesn't it? Either that child trying to get mom's attention because she looks up to her mother so much becomes the perfect child and succeeds at everything,
Or she
or
rebels.
or she cashes out. She stops trying. She goes doing drugs, spreads her legs for the boys, whatever it might be. Or it's some derivative of that. And maybe it's not right away. Maybe it's 10 years later, whatever it is. And so those messages that parents don't even intend to send can have profound negative impact for a very long time. So by the time someone crosses the threshold of my office, be it at 40 or 50 or 60, in most cases with most of my clients, they are extraordinarily successful people, like people you've heard of. And they can't figure out why I have everything. But the hole inside that American dream and all the everything was supposed to fill, it didn't fill it. And we all know that as a cliche, oh, stuff and titles won't fill it. But to spend your whole life pursuing it and really trying to pursue the approval of the parent, or the approval, the acceptance, the acknowledgement of what they did, the apology, the affection, whatever it might be, they've been pursuing it their whole lives. And why is it not enough for me? And so now we're going into the shit of that past that they've spent their whole life running from. But the truth is we all run from it because it's so scary, until it's like we're running from this tidal wave of all the pain and the fears and the bullshit beliefs that we've believed our whole lives. And in the end, we have to turn, we have to face it and allow it to come out. So then to your question, what is peace? How do I define peace? Peace is the flushing out of all of that stuff until we finally, for the first time in our lives, we have pulled out all that crud. For the first time in our lives, we can hear our own soul. We can feel the voice of God, the voice of the universe. We can just feel who I am authentically. And it's a very different experience. It's not hoping, it's not figuring it out, it's not wondering, it's not thinking about, it's a sense of knowing. And there's an old Buddhist Zen proverb that says the truth is obvious. When you've done the work of flushing out all that stuff, your clarity about who you are is crystal clear. The sense of power you have is so great that you become the most docile person ever, because you're not compensating for other messages inside you. Once you get all those messages out, you can express your power, you can conjure the power on a moment's notice. But so that defining of peace is the emptying of all of that non-peace, all those other voices. And that just takes work. But the grand myth, particularly in America, the grand myth is that it has to take a long time. I've met people, I've worked with people who were in therapy with someone for 25 years. Or in therapy. I had one client who was in therapy, and this woman was an MD, and she was in therapy for 11 years, 3 days a week. I'm like, oh my God, just give me 3 months. Give me 3 months. All right. Let's save you a few $100,000. Give me 3 months. And so it doesn't have to take forever. True healing doesn't have to take forever. Finding peace again, but you got to be, and that's why the fundamental linchpin.
Have to do the work.
And the linchpin of doing the work is courage. You cannot, without the courage to face those dragons. And one of my favorite quotes is by Joseph Campbell, the great, great writer and thinker of the 20th century, one of them. And he said, the cave you most fear to enter holds the treasure you seek.
Yep.
Yeah. And that requires the courage to go into it. And the only thing that ever drives people really to have the courage to go into that cave is pain. Pain. The pain of the misery of living this way. And until that pain gets so bad, you're going to cling to this way of living until it gets so bad and you realize it doesn't work. And I need a different path. And I'm finally, fuck it, I don't even care anymore. I have to do this for my own self because I'm dying here. So
I totally resonate and understand that. Just at certain points in my life, especially as I've gotten older and come to face a lot of things from my childhood, and I get very frustrated at times when they like say love yourself. It's like, I love myself, I'm fine. You know, you don't like when I hold up the mirror. It's like everyone tells me what to do, I do the work, I hold up the mirror. Oh my God, I can't handle that. And that's very frustrating for me. So I do understand. I do understand. And so now that you've defined what peace is for yourself and in general, how do you find peace? What is your go-to for finding peace?
Well, my go-to for finding peace is the very thing that sort of brought me to there. What brought me to there was I had to go inside of my love cup, and I had to pull out all of the pain and the fears and the bullshit beliefs that had been crammed in there about my sense of worth, about my wantability, my lovability. And I had to do the work of taking those out. I literally had to go into all of my any past memory that had any sort of emotional charge attached to it. I went into every memory that I could think of, listed all the emotional charges, and I went through and did the processing work, journaling, writing letters I don't send, using a couple of different methods that I talk about in my book to decharge past memories. Therefore, by doing so, what I did was I emptied the crud out of my love cup and patched the hole in the bottom of the love cup. So now, when new things enter into my love cup, get dropped into my love cup that upset me, that stir me, that anger me, that make me sad, that whatever it might be, that make me feel some powerful emotion, what I do to get peace again is I use the very tools that got it for me in the first place, and I pull it out. And I pull out the pain, the fears, and whatever messages about my worth or my sense of mattering, whatever accompanies them, and I pull that out. So once you really fully empty your love cup, or near fully, then any new thing being dropped in is kind of no big deal, because you used to have a full love cup full of crud, and now you're filling it with your own with the ways that feed life to you, but you're also emptying out when some new crud gets dropped into that. So it's the same old stuff it always is for me. This is what I tell clients, and this is what I talk about. Journaling, the Sedona method, writing letters you don't send. There's an acceptance technique I teach in my book, but then it's the usual stuff. Time alone. I'm very protective of my alone time. Heavy exercise. I'm a power lifter, and it's a tremendous release for me. Plus, I'm extraordinarily vain, so that helps that. Time with the one or two or four that I love. I like to take road trips. It's just infusing my life with the things that breathe energy into me, not happiness, energy. And that really, that was an eye opener for me. I'm going to give a shout out to a book that came out in the 80s, late 80s, that changed my thinking. It was sort of new agey back in the day. It's still a little new agey. And the title is Living in the Light, and it's by Shakti Gawain. It was a bestseller. And what I like about it is it's just this really simple understanding of intuition, or self, as I would call it, and energy. And that it's really not about finding happiness in life. It's simply following those things that give you energy. And it's letting go of or aborting those things that bleed your energy, that bore you, that numb you, that you have to conjure up energy just to do. And so for me, the filling of my love cup with the energy and with the love is doing the things that give me energy. And then the emptying of the love cup is removing the things, particularly inside of me or in my external life, that are bleeding my life energy, because I believe that is how God talks. And you mentioned that you're a church person, so I will reference, I'm not a religious person anymore, but that was my career, and I was a theologian and wrote books in that field and so forth. One of the things that caused my life to pivot was when I was still a pastor, and the good pastors are always wrestling with their own faith, the really good ones, and they're open about it. When Mother Teresa died, they discovered her own personal diaries, and they discovered she had a 20-year crisis of faith. Mother Teresa, you think, gosh, she's got it all figured out, this old, beautiful, wonderful old woman, and so that the good ones do, because then they can speak to the wrestling with faith that the person in the pew is going through. Right. So anyway, where the hell was I going with that? Yeah. Oh, well, couldn't have been that good. I forgot. Either that or I'm just getting old. So go on. Your next point.
No, I know very much what it is to struggle with religion, because why I do connect and associate with the Lutheran Church and the Lutheran faith, I don't discount anybody else's faith. I mean, my ex-husband is Catholic. My ex-father-in-law is a devout religious Catholic. My current man is Jewish. I really, I'm not, it's like, okay, when you tell me you're an atheist, I get a little concerned because of just my ego. It's like, okay, don't you believe in something bigger? the universe or something. But again, that's my ego, and it's wrestling with that faith
Sure.
of there, because there have been times when you get tested. You feel that God, the universe, what have you, is testing you. It's like, what more are you going to throw at me? What more, it's like, how long can I stand in the ring and not get knocked down? And you got to remember all the times that you made it through, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, wrestling with that faith is making it through every time I feel like I'm being truly tested by God, the universe, or what have you. And
That's great.
just step back and let go. As you said, let go, open your hand and let go. And
Mm-hmm.
that is hard for the ego. So I
It
find
is.
my ego spends a lot of time in the corner. I have no other place. It's like, that's the quintessential punishment. It's go sit in the corner.
How's
So
that work?
I put it in the corner. It's like, we're okay. Just go sit over there. I got this.
That's great.
Um, but wrestling with that, especially when I became a Reiki master. And that's like doing Kundalini, or the other Jewish one,
Mm-hmm.
Kabbalah,
Mm-hmm.
where it transcends faith. It
Mm-hmm.
transcends religion. So that struggle is real, to find the inner peace and come to terms with, there are going to be people in the church who are going to think I'm crazy or that I'm wrong. And I just have to say, that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Good for you. Good for you.
Um, so that also comes down to like the pastor of the church, and it's like, oh, no, no, no. And I don't think it's ego. I think it's just the way he perceives religion and the way he was taught in seminary and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you go on missionary trips, what's the number one goal? Is to convert everyone to your religion. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what every other missionary in the area is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the missionaries who go to make a difference. And
Right.
we've had a few pastors that do that.
That's great.
That's just my little aside. But as to, the struggling of the faith and the struggling of the self, and coming to terms with the self
Mm-hmm.
and finding peace with that. So the other question I love to ask is, how do you bring peace to others?
I wait for them to ask. If they ask, so when I was doing street ministry for 2.5 years, um, if somebody asks, or here's the thing, when people have actually done the work of emptying the vault of all their past pain. Hi, Michael. Good to have you here. Thanks. When people have done the work of emptying the pain and the fears and the bullshit beliefs they've been taught about themselves, they're just different. And it's just different. They have a different energy. Everything is different. And when you are different, people want what you have. When you are different in that way, when you're burn clean energy, where your happiness isn't just a fake smile, where you have a calm about you, we sense when people are that way, and they're not common. We sense it and we want what they have. It's that great line from When Harry Met Sally, and she fakes the orgasm in the cafe. And then Rob Reiner's mother, the actress, says, I'll have what she's having, right? It's that same thing that people naturally approach you. So as far as helping others, first of all, I wait for them to ask. I don't, if someone doesn't want, that was one of the best things I learned living on the street and being among the homeless. One of the best things I ever learned was not my business, because they are extremely testy people. Don't touch my shit. And if it's not your argument between two people, you just stay out. And I'm that way. It's if someone wants something from me, I'll offer what little I know, or an idea or a question, but beyond that, I don't. And so then I'm always, if someone asks or comes to me for counseling, I'm just, I'm basically the stuff I've already stepped you through. And I actually remembered the thing I was going to say earlier about the pivot for me in terms of happiness, in terms of energy in particular. I was a pastor at the time, a Lutheran pastor, and I was wondering, what am I called to next? God, what's your will for my life? And I had an insight, and we so often think in terms of, well, what would make me happy? Or, what am I called? What do I feel I got to do to serve or whatever? And I thought about that great story, whether you take it as literal or metaphor, isn't really the point. The story is the story. And so it's that great story from the creation in the Judeo-Christian story, and that is that God forms the clay into the shape of a man, but the man doesn't have life yet. He's not animated. He has no animus. He's not living. What does God do to give that clay life? He breathes into its nostrils. And then man comes alive, as the story goes. Okay, then there's that other story in the Christian story where, Jesus come back to life. He's meeting with his disciples in the upper room, and now it's Pentecost. And he comes to them and he says, receive my Holy Spirit, and tongues of fire over their head. And he says, receive my Holy Spirit. Now go out and get to work, evangelize the whole entire world. But he breathes on them. He breathes on them. So here we have two instances, one of God and one of Jesus, breathing the breath of life. And I began to think about that in terms of, well, what's God's calling for my life, or what's my own soul calling me to do? And I thought about it as, what if I were to just do that which breathes life into me? To not think about it as happiness. Happiness is up here. That which gives me energy, breathes life into me, that's on my skin, that's in my gut. That's a different feeling. That's not a thought. It's what just naturally gives you energy. Has it occurred to you that that's your authentic self? Because the truth is, there are people, for instance, I have a very good friend. He's heavy into saving the environment and animals and bees especially. And that is his passion. And I'm like, that's awesome, man, but that ain't my passion. I would blow my brains out if I had to fight for the environment, because I know how hard that is, and you feel like you're losing the battle. It's just not my passion. I support him 100%. I love it, but it's not my passion. So I have things that breathe life into me. You have things that breathe energy into you. Is it possible that God, or the universe, or however you look at it, has assigned different things to different people that breathe energy into them, and that is your calling? And that the things that are sucking the life out of you or pulling you down, or that you have to conjure up energy just to go do, or the things that are boring you, or the things that are depressing the hell out of you, aren't you. Aren't you. Is it possible that your energy is the voice of God, God's self? And once I had that revelation, it's like, well, then it's simple. All I got to do is just follow the path of the things that breathe life into me, knowing that this one thing might lead to something else and then lead to something else, but just do the things that breathe life into you. And then by doing that, I'm filling my love cup with energy, with love, with passion. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that. So anyway, that was a big shift for me. So when it comes to this notion of peace, I have peace because I'm no longer doing those things that bleed my life energy. I only give from a full cup. If I don't feel like giving, I stop. If it doesn't breathe life into me, so that when I am giving, I'm really excited about it and I'm passionate. I give, a lot of my clients free extra time. Every single one of my counseling clients is required to write an autobiography for me, and it's 10 pages, and I'll spend 2 to 3 hours studying it, not just reading it, studying it, marking it up. I have a color coding of how I mark up an autobiography. Orange, yellow, green, and black. And each one means a different thing. I'll spend 2 to 3 hours. I don't charge for that. And my rate is $500 an hour. So if I spend 3 hours, I've just given them a gift of $1,500. But I'm doing it because I know the payoff for me is the second they get in my door, we can move a whole lot faster than any other therapist. And that makes it exciting for me, because now we're down into the deep shit within 15 minutes, not 8 sessions later. So I do that as much for me as for them. So the point is, if you're giving from a full cup, it's a very different experience from giving from an empty cup, where you're just forcing it, or you're wanting people to think you're a giver, or you feel obligated to do it. And that's the benefit of getting all that crud out of your cup that says you should this, or you're not enough that, or you prove yourself that, or what are people saying, all that crap. So anyway.
No, I think that's beautiful. And as you read, Michael agrees that, so many people need to realize this and get that message. It's a great message. And goes back to we have our own energetic energetic signatures. So what I bring to the table and what you bring to the table are two different things. And are they going to meld and they going to work together, or, mix or not mix? So that's a great way of looking at it. And then getting down right to the heart of the matter. I think that's great. Because so many people spend too much time in therapy going nowhere, as you
Right.
expressed earlier.
Yeah.
So, uh, the last question I always like to ask and end with is, what's in your toolbox? And okay, you told a story of how you would go down and visit your kids at LSU. Now, what if I don't? This is hypothetical. What if a sorority sister or a frat brother was, really stressed out, and you notice this? What is your toolbox to try and get that person up to peacefulness, or at least de-stress?
Sure, fair enough. So in other words, someone that hasn't asked me for help,
Correct.
but I'm recognizing an issue. And in this case, in your example, it is not one of my own children. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right, because with my own children, I know better than to meddle. I'll get a papa. Come on. And that's how my parents parented us. It's like, if you have a problem, I trust you'll bring it to me if you need me. Otherwise, you make good decisions. You'll do just fine.
Kind of almost how I do it with Jeffrey.
That's great. That's great. And Jeffrey is the better for it. And that's great. My mother always used to say, she used to say this to me back when I was 13 and 14 years old, when she was teaching me listening techniques and all that shit. And I was the youngest of 6 kids, and she had taught me how to sew, and my parents had taught me how to garden and all these things. And then she taught me what she was best at. And she was, a suicide prevention counselor, and she taught at the graduate level, and she was an expert when it came to questions and listening. And so she taught me these things. But one of the things she used to say is, Sven, always remember, and I'm 13 when she's telling me this. I'm like, I had no idea why she was telling me it, but man, have I gotten miles out of this. She said, Sven, always remember, children want to be heard, not fixed. Heard, not fixed. Because my parents absolutely believe that if you let the child flush out all the crud that's inside them, how they're feeling. Well, what's your fear? Well, what if Susie does that? Then what would it feel like? Or what if this doesn't go through, or whatever? And as they flush out all their anxieties and fears, they begin to very clearly see what they want to do or what feels right. We don't have to fix them. Okay. So back to your question then. Someone is clearly agitated or whatever, and what do? Very often, I'll let it go. They haven't asked. And for some people, I know I get offended when someone presumes to step into my life and in some way or another, whether by statements or questions, presumes to manipulate me where they think I need to go. It's quite presumptuous, right? But if the person and I are engaged in conversation, or where there's some sort of connection, so I'm not just walking up out of the blue, like,
Right.
the Bible thumpers of the 1970s, we all got fucking annoyed by that shit. But if we have some sort of connection, I'll always open with a question. People open up to questions, right? And what I learned from my mother, I mean, apart from this interview, but in most of my life, I try to speak in questions, not statements. Because questions keep the focus on the other person, and they feel special, that somebody gives a shit enough. And I don't mean just asking about your day, though that's good, but what do you think? What are your thoughts? What does that feel like? Or what was the hardest part? And so if in your theoretical situation, though my kids are well past being at LSU, they're in their 30s and so forth, but I might ask a question like, so let me ask you a dumb question, Steve. And let's say Steve and I are having a beers, because if I were at a fraternity, why would I be at a fraternity if it wasn't to have some beers with the frat boys, right? Or let's say we're at a party and we're having beers together and say, all right, Steve, so let me ask you a stupid question. And I admit it's a stupid question in advance, all right? Maybe not the shit to talk about at a kegger, but who cares? Answer it if you want. Don't answer it. Tell me to go fuck myself. I don't care. And then by that time, they're laughing and they're disarmed. Now they're disarmed, because I'm admitting I'm about to ask a stupid question. I'm giving them full permission to tell me to go screw myself. There's zero pressure. They don't feel like I'm coming in hot with some agenda. And I just ask the question. I say, so I haven't been a college kid in freaking 35, 40 years. Okay. So I don't even know what college is like. What's the hardest thing? And again, this is a stupid question, Steve, but what's the hardest part about being a college kid nowadays? Now, I haven't asked him, what's going on with you, buddy? I just asked him a random question, seemingly innocuous, as teach me, young man. And then guess what he's going to do? He's probably going to laugh and he's going to say, something. I'll say, is that true? Is that the hardest part for you? And it just doesn't take more than a question or two of no pressure before someone the blossom just opens right up. And then as long as I'm respectful and say, and what's the hardest part about that? Or what's the scariest part? Two of the most pivotal questions that I ask the most with people in any situation is, what's the hardest part? What's the scariest part? And if they say, I'm not afraid. And I say, well, that seems weird. If I were in your shoes, I'd be scared shitless. And that's the other thing, especially when I'm dealing with regular people, kids, people on the street, everyday folks, highly successful people. I always use earthy language. I studied 5 languages. I'm an intermediate level etymologist. Language isn't my problem. Language is a tool. And so I just speak how normal people speak. And then before you know it, it'll be 5 or 8 minutes. And Steve's sharing with me that, his mom just divorced his dad. And Steve just discovered that mom thought it would be a great idea to wait to divorce until he got to college, but now he has no one around him. Whereas he wishes she would have divorced him 15 years ago when he was saying he was saying to his mom, just divorce dad. No, I'm going to stay together for the kids. And that was a horrible idea mom made. And now I'm off 1,000 miles away from home, and I don't know anybody here except my knucklehead friends. And I'm really pissed at my mom, and it's killing me, and I can't even study. Guess what? In 5 minutes. 6 minutes, by a few innocuous questions, Steve has just opened himself right up. And very often, remember what mom said, children want to be heard, not fixed. By potentially being the only person that is listening to him, the only person he can get this shit off his chest, even if it's for that moment in time. And to be able to get it off his chest, even for that moment in time, he feels a little bit better. And maybe then he says, hey, Sven, would it be okay if I, sent you an email or something? Yeah, sure, kid, no problem. Now we've opened a door. And again, all it takes to get the peace is empty the love cup. Empty the love cup. And nothing empties love cups like questions. So for me, that's how I do it.
Questions are great. We always... I'm an inquisitive one myself. I ask a lot of questions. I was the why child. But why? But why? But why?
That's great.
Still, kind of a why adult too. But why?
That's wonderful.
So I totally see with questions, and even with my own son, we do butt heads because he's of that age of, we're gonna go like this. And I have to remember, was I like this? And you call mom, and yeah, you were. Good luck with that.
Mom's revenge.
Mom's revenge, yes. And even with Michael helping me, kind of like let Jeffrey, it's like he'll come to me. Yeah, I can tell something's bothering him, and I want to prod. And now I just kind of step back, and he'll come to me when he's ready. I have to be that safe space for him. I try very hard to be that safe space. There are times where I feel that I have to push. And that's a parental instinct. But I try not to do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's only certain instances where if it's like, okay, your grades are really down, this, that, and it's like, and I'm not one for perfect grades. Mm-hmm. As long as you get a C or better, I'm going to leave you alone because that means you're trying. Mm. But once you start going below that, it's like, okay, what do I need? What do you need? How can I help you? What do we need to do to get this up? Just because I'm a parent. I want him to graduate. But when he does unload, he feels safe enough to do it.
That's great.
So I totally understand that toolbox method of letting the kid come to you. That was a little bit of a lesson for this mom.
As parents, we're all learning the lessons. And let me tell you, let me just share one thing with you regarding those lessons that I learned from my own parents. I think the master stroke in my parents, and my mother taught at the graduate level. She taught early childhood education. She had been a teacher coming out of college, and so she was quite literally an expert. She was teaching at the graduate level in the field of early childhood in particular, but then sort of extrapolating to the other years because she had raised 6 kids. And one of what I believe, not one of the master stroke of my parents' parenting was when us kids, and again, I'm the youngest of 6, the oldest is 11 years older than me. when as kids we're in our 20s, each of us at different times, maybe late 20s, maybe early 30s for some. For me, it was like 25. I know that most of us kids went to the folks at one time or another, each of the folks individually, and told them what had hurt in childhood or where we felt that they had made mistakes or let us down. And my dad, he would go on walks for these, and they would listen. It was individual, it wasn't two parents together. And I don't know that the parents necessarily solicited it, but they were completely open and they listened. And I know that in both my mother and my father's case, they owned it. And they said, wow, I really need to think about this, Sven. And first of all, I am so sorry. I am truly sorry for causing that or for being negligent or whatever it was, and owned it. And they said, and I need to think about this some more. And I'd like to come back to you at some point and talk it out some more and hear more from you about it. And they owned it. They didn't deny, deflect, dodge, or defend. They just owned it. And then, fascinatingly, then when my parents were in their 80s, my mother in particular came to each one of her kids. I know this for a fact. Went to each one of her kids and she said, if there are any, to use a metaphor that I use in my book, if there are any rocks in that burlap sack on your back that I put there, any pain that I caused, anything I inflicted on you, I want the rock back, please. I put it there. I caused that. I want it back so that you don't have to carry it anymore. Well, my parents are in their 80s at that point. I got a brother in his, mid whatever, we're all in our 50s, 60s, whatever. And she was very deliberate about that. And then again, in her final year of life in 2021, she went back to each one of her kids. So dad has passed, went back to each one of her kids and says, if there's anything, please let me take it so that it will not be on your heart after I'm gone. 3
That's
times.
an amazing gift.
Dad did it too. And you have to understand this, what that is you talked earlier about it with regard to yourself. That is her own overcoming of ego or warring with ego or the desire to fundamentally, because what do? Anything I invest myself more into, let's say one of my books, I have a vested interest in. That's part of my identity, my life's work, or one of my kids, or my girlfriend, or whatever it might be. That and thing, person, whatever it might be, path becomes part of my identity. Well, when you're a parent, you're pumping in so much into that child. A good parent is. And so your identity becomes wrapped up in that. So the notion of taking criticism on it, or that I made mistakes, or I made some significant mistakes even, well, that's hard on the ego. No, I'm a great mom. No, I was a great dad. I don't know what you're talking about. See, that's my own ego. So the master stroke of parenting happens 15, 20, 40 years after the fact. When that person comes to you and say, Ma, I love you, but, and I don't mean to hurt your feelings, Dad, but you really screwed up on this. And the effect on me was X, Y, and Z. And the inclination is, no, I didn't. The inclination is, well, what about you? Or you were just a hard kid, or whatever it is, rather than thinking, wait a minute, if my 25-year-old kid, my 30-year-old kid comes to me and they have an issue with what I did, what do I lose? What do I lose by taking it and saying, you know what, I need to look at this and I'm really sorry? They gain everything. They just handed me a 100-pound boulder that was in that bag on the rock. At the very age when they're supposed to begin flying at full wingspan, they're being burdened by a 100-pound rock that I put there. Give me the rock back. Of course I'll take it. Why would I want you to have that? What, because my ego is so frail? No, man. That's when parenting hits the ultimate test. When they come back to you 20 years from now, do you have the courage and the humility to acknowledge and own what you did? That's when parenting, that's where the real rubber hits the road, in my opinion. But anyway, that's that.
Thank you for those tidbits, and I truly agree. And parenting is an adventure. I have to look at it as an adventure. I can't say it's a challenge, because then it becomes more of that. It's been an adventure full of twists and turns.
Sure.
Um, but I want to thank you for joining us tonight and talking peace. And we're going to put you back in the green room for a minute, and we're going to close up. One second. So I want to thank you all for joining us tonight on a special edition of Unique Peace and for welcoming Sven. And if you want to learn more about him or check out any of his books, he's written 6 of them, go to badasscounseling.com. He and his entire bio is there. All of his books are there. How to contact him is there. And I thank you. And I look forward to seeing you on Sunday morning when we have Dr. Jervon James on. And she's going to be talking about what brings her peace. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.